just getting started in my business, I decided I needed to do some local networking. I heard it would be good for my business, so I did some digging and I started looking at small business groups on meetup.com. I felt really lucky when I quickly found a local small business meetup that was happening just a short distance from my house. At the first meeting, we were each invited to briefly introduce ourselves and explain our businesses, which is really common in these types of meetings. When it was my turn, one woman looked up sharply like she'd been stung by a bee as I started to talk about my business. She caught my eye and I smiled at her. At first, she just kind of stared at me, but then I saw a small smile form on her face. I felt relieved and I went on. After the introductions, we had lunch and I went over to say hello to the woman. She seemed really friendly at first. She was gorgeous, charming, incredibly successful. She seemed to be someone I could really learn a lot from. She said she'd been in business for years, though in hindsight I realized she didn't really explain her business when given the chance to do that, and what she did say was pretty vague. But still, she seemed pretty successful. She talked the big talk, and as far as I could tell, she was walking the big walk. She drove an expensive car, she had an expensive bag, and you know those expensive shoes with the red soles? Yeah, she had those too. And her jewelry, I could tell it was all real, in stark contrast to my costume knockoffs at the time. Well, I was on the hunt for a mentor, and she seemed like the perfect fit. She was confident, attractive, seemed really intelligent, asked me a lot of questions about my business, and she even offered little snippets of advice that seemed totally legit to me. At the end of the meeting, she invited me to meet her for lunch the following week. Well, that day, when we did meet for lunch, she asked me for some more details about my business, which of course I happily shared. Then, much to my delight, she was telling me all about her upcoming executive board meeting. Executive board meeting! She said they were considering investing in other local small businesses and that if I played my cards right, they might invest in mine. I was over the moon. I practically worshiped this woman. I wanted to be her. And since the lady promised to bring me up at this upcoming meeting, what did I do? I started pulling together all the documentation and information about my business. The next day, I emailed her the information she wanted, and I waited for her to get back to me after her meeting. But then she went silent. I was kind of sad. I figured, well, maybe my business just really isn't up to snuff yet for this executive board. I understood. After all, I had just started my business not long before that, and I wasn't really very successful yet. And of course, the stark contrast between my business and hers. She, according to her at that time, was clearly well beyond me. I counted myself lucky for the time we did spend together, and I just kind of moved on. She had an executive board. All I had at the time was just myself. But a couple of months later, I noticed that she created a brand new Facebook page. Well, when I went to look at it, I saw that she had launched a new business, it seemed, and when I started looking into it, it kind of turned out that her business was eerily familiar. In fact, it was like she had literally copied the business plan and structure that I had outlined for her a couple months earlier. Well, of course, I was shocked and I was angry. I was confused. I reached out to her and I said, "What are you doing?" She quickly told me I was mistaken, that it had been her idea the whole time. She said the business plan that I submitted to her was a joke, and that was why she'd gone silent. She subtly tore me down, implying that I was stupid to think that someone like her could possibly take an idea from someone as small potatoes as me. Of course, when I pointed out that she had literally done everything I'd put in the business plan, well, she got really offended. She screamed at me. She told me, "I'm tired of people always accusing me of stuff like this." And I thought, what? Then she called me jealous and immediately blocked me. And then, from what I heard, she started talking to our very few mutual connections about how I thought I owned my niche and how she practically invented me anyway. It went on from there. What I missed was that her apparent confidence was a little bit more like grandiosity. And I missed that she had used me to get an idea for a short-lived business that never happened. I missed that this was a pattern with her. I missed that she only liked me while I was actively worshiping her, and I didn't expect her to attack me the way that she did. Yeah, I missed all the red flags. Later, I would learn that I wasn't the only person she had done this to. Apparently, several people who had been a part of the group at different times had experienced the same thing. I learned that her fancy bag and her car and her shoes were not thanks to her business. They were thanks to her wealthy husband. And I also learned, sadly, that she was a bored stay-at-home wife with no kids who had too much time on her hands. As for her stealing all of my business, I admit I worried for a minute. After all, she had a lot more money than I did, and as far as I could tell, would be far more successful than I could with all that money. But I didn't have to worry for long, because after failing to become immediately successful, she moved on to someone else's idea. Plus, if we're being honest, she was trying to be someone she really just wasn't. So, was she a narcissist? I don't know. But she certainly behaved like one in certain ways. Let me explain what I mean. When you think of a narcissist, you don't really think of someone who's insecure, do you? I mean, most narcissists seem to be the exact opposite of insecure. After all, narcissists are known for being vain and self-centered. They often demand your attention, they want to be admired, and they feel the need to monitor the amount of respect you give them. They exaggerate their achievements, and they seem like they only care about themselves. And we all know they manipulate people to get what they want. And as I'm sure you're well aware, narcissists are boastful, and they exaggerate their self-importance. They also tend to not acknowledge that anyone else has needs, wants, feelings, things like that, thanks to their extreme lack of empathy. They seem to literally believe that they are the center of the universe. Does that sound familiar to you? And the other thing is that narcissists refuse to be reflective and dig deep to become reflective. They can't self-reflect. In fact, they're kind of threatened by that idea, and they're going to avoid it at all costs. I mean, God forbid they should catch a glimpse of their true selves. It would destroy them. So you might be asking yourself now, well, are narcissists insecure or not? The short answer is that, yeah, they're very insecure, even though it seems otherwise most of the time. To be fair, covert narcissists often seem a little or a lot insecure, but most narcissists seem to carry around some level of insecurity with them. So let's break it down further as to how they're insecure. Number one, the narcissist's need to boast is what makes them insecure, at least partially. Someone who is secure doesn't have the need to brag about all their accomplishments. People who are sure of themselves are modest most of the time, and they really don't like to show off, and even if they do, they're not doing it for the wrong reasons. But the narcissist has to make it known that they have the best car on the block, or the biggest house, or fanciest clothing, or whatever. And while it might seem that it's all about showing off, the sad truth is that they do this in order to validate their struggling self-worth. Number two, narcissists put other people down intentionally. Anyone who is secure in him or herself is always going to treat other people with respect. And if they don't like someone, they're just not going to associate with them. Or at the very least, they're going to keep it at a polite minimum. But the narcissist is known to brag and boast in addition to actively putting people down. That's because they want to make you feel inferior and like they're better than you are. They need to make you feel inferior because it helps them feel better about themselves, which of course is another indication of insecurity. I mean, after all, people with a relatively healthy self-image don't need to stand on the pain of others in order to feel good about who they are. Number three, narcissists don't care about the wants and needs of other people. So they don't care if you are missing out on something or you're not getting what you need. This, of course, is again due to their extreme lack of empathy, but they care very much about their own wants and needs. In fact, they seem to only care about themselves and getting what they need. And if you think about it, you can probably think of a time when some adult in your life behaved like a child when they didn't get what they wanted. Maybe more often than not, if you were dealing with a narcissist. This also shows some deep insecurity within them because they fear that they're going to miss out on what they want and need. And this is why they don't hesitate to make sure they don't miss out at the expense of others. Number four, their need to control others is a sign of insecurity. It's a well-known fact that narcissists are controlling, and that's why they use manipulation tactics like gaslighting and other forms of narcissistic abuse. Anyone who is secure within him or herself is never going to need to resort to manipulation, with the exception in rare cases where they might have felt wronged and felt the need to be compensated for understandable reasons. Psychologists tell us that they feel the need to control people around them as well as their environments because they often feel like they have no control over the other parts of their lives. So they become master manipulators as a result of that. And of course, all of that stems from insecurity. Number five, narcissists cannot handle criticism. Listen, no one loves to be criticized, but if the criticism is constructive, then you can accept it gracefully, even if you don't always put what is suggested to use. Narcissists, however, fly off the handle when they are criticized, and this is because of the fact that their fragile self-esteem is threatened when that happens. That's because narcissists tend to be triggered anytime they feel that their vulnerabilities are exposed. They will react angrily, often clapping back to the person giving them criticism with a passive-aggressive response or even by mocking them. This, of course, is humiliating the person giving the criticism and they feel rejected. The narcissist does this because it takes the heat off him or herself and sort of attempts to level the playing field, so to speak, as in protect their fragile egos by putting the focus back on the person who dares to criticize them. Bottom line, high self-esteem and narcissism, not the same thing. True confidence in yourself is not narcissistic. The biggest difference is that when you have actual self-esteem, you're far more likely to focus on things like healthy relationships, being happy, etc. Well, narcissists fail to do this because they generally don't care how other people feel. Rather, they want to know what people can do for them. And of course, there's always the fact that they're trying to validate their self-worth consistently. And of course, again, when you have actual self-esteem, you don't need to do that all the time. Yeah. This brings me to the question of the day. And the question of the day is, do you know a narcissist who seems super confident, but who's actually very insecure? Share your thoughts, share your ideas, share your experiences in the comment section below, and let's talk about it. As always, thank you so much for being a part of my day and a part of my life. And hey, thanks for letting me be a part of yours. It really does mean a lot to me. Now, before I go, make sure you take a look at the videos I'm leaving for you here and there. And while you're at it, hit the subscribe button so we can stay connected and continue on our healing journey together. I'll see you soon.